Gosh, Bowen Yang, I am so excited to talk to you, but also so excited at I'm very excited for your success, Bowen. So the first thing I want to say is congratulations on everything.
Thank you, Katie. Wow. I mean, I don't know why that hit me like a ton of bricks, but I'm just hearing you say all that in one string of statements is incredible. Thank you so much. That means so much.
Well, I'm curious, what has it meant to you? I mean, here you are. I feel like you're just in the white hot epicenter of comedy right now. And when I told all my friends who are of a certain age, i.e., in their 20s, like my daughter and some of my work colleagues, that I was talking to you, they were so excited. So I'm just describe what it is like for you right now. What is it like to be Bowen Yang and at this moment?
Okay, at this moment, I am dealing with a disaster zone of an apartment. I just moved. So in this moment, what it feels like to be Bowen Yang is trying to figure out how to hang stuff on exposed brick. You see a bunch of brick behind me.
I do.
Um, I'm honestly, I mean, if I can be really honest with you, it's all of this the stuff that's happening professionally is getting a little bit buried and swallowed up in like personal life stuff that is all very good. Nothing's distressing, but it's and I think it's probably very grounding in that way where I'm like, I'm not letting any thoughts about like how I'm doing with just where I'm positioned in my career right now because I literally just have to think about like assembling a desk later or something, you know?
So that's keeping you grounded.
I think so.
And kind of compartmentalizing and not kind of trying to get or trying not to get swept up and overwhelmed and thinking you're all that. I guess you have to kind of make a conscious effort to find that yin yang,
Yeah,
Bowen Yang.
as it were, as it were. I mean, yeah, but I mean, I should say that I am overwhelmed, but just with like decision fatigue stuff that's like, I mean, I just went to the grocery store and I'm like, do I want salami or do I want sopressata? It's like that kind of stuff. And it's like little granular things like that that really kind of would be paralyzing, I think. And they might be, I might be on my way to just being fully like, I gotta be a shut-in, but I don't know. I don't know, Katie. I mean, like, what do you make of it? Like, how should I be? I feel like you've talked to so many people that you must have some mental model of like what the best mindset is for people
Well, I
in
don't
my
know. I feel
position.
like you were kind of destined for this moment and for
Oh my
this
God.
opportunity. No, no,
What?
no, no, no. Just reading all about you and your life and the fact that your high school voted you most likely to appear on SNL, which is so funny. And it's just, listen, it's just sort of everything kind of came together. And so I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're not
Yes.
so neurotic that you can't be like, wow, this is pretty effing cool.
Well, I thank you for saying that because I think that has been something that's like not held me back in any way, but whatever. I mean, you probably can relate to this. They asked me to write this like commencement speechy thing for this like whatever, this like podcast that's like putting out commencement speeches. And I wrote something and I thought back to my own commencement, like my graduation experiences. And the theme for both of those was that I was not present, that I was just living in anxiety about what was coming next. And I wish that I had sort of like understood that, commencement ceremonies like that are important for this, like they're important unto themselves. Like they're important because because life doesn't give you opportunities to like ceremoniously celebrate yourself in any way or like where you're at. And I think I have I wrote that and then I consciously thought, wow, maybe I should do this. Like this should apply to me now, right? Like I should be kind of sitting very still whenever I can with the idea that like, wow, I mean, this is really special. And I am living this exceptional thing that I think has happened both serendipitously and fortuitously, but also through work. And like there's a way to think about that in some balanced way. And then my parents were in town this weekend. um
I saw your mom on Saturday night. She was
yeah.
so cute. I loved her kissing you and then trying to Purell your cheek.
Purella.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was a good beat. It was a really cute
that
bit.
was cute. Did you guys come up with that together?
That was something that the writers of the Cold Open, Sudie Green and Fran Gillespie did. And I mean, they had to write some quick little comedy
I
beat for
know they
all of
did
the
a good
moms.
job.
They did a great job. And I mean, my mom had a blast, and she got a lot of compliments from people at the show being like, I mean, prop work, that is not easy. That's very technical on TV. And so, but yeah, I mean, she was in town, and she turned to me yesterday. She goes, Bowen, you're very lucky to be doing what you're doing. And I go, yeah, you're right. Like I have gotten to some like jaded points in the past year that I've thought, oh God, like this is I'm sort of like just kind of going through the motions sometimes and thinking that it's not something that I I'm doing with the enthusiasm that I want to have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I also think the pandemic sort of screwed everybody up. So I
Sure.
think you should give yourself a pass on kind of feeling some ambivalence, right?
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally, totally. But yeah, I mean, like, but you're right. Like, this is, I should be sitting with this with as as little neuroses as possible, or in some healthy positioning where I don't have to think about, oh God, do I deserve this? Do I this? Do I that? Yeah,
Yeah. And you know, just enjoying it because, you know, it's interesting because the work is work, but it's also work that clearly you have been sort of training for in one way or another your whole life. And
sure.
in preparing for this interview, I loved hearing sort of your really fascinating life story about your mom and dad. They're both born in China, yes, and both
Hmm.
very accomplished, right? Your dad's an engineer,
Yes,
with mining expertise. Your
you
mom is
got
an
it.
OBGYN.
Hmm.
And you all came to this country. Where did they first move?
So they met in China and they first moved to Brisbane, Australia, where my dad was getting his doctorate. And then at that point, my mom sort of made the sacrifice to, I mean, her license didn't just transfer over when she moved out of China. And so she was sort of just making sure that we were all kind of that the children were being raised for a while before she got back into work. When we moved to Canada, we moved to Kingston, Ontario, and then Montreal. And then that's where my sister and I were up until I was like 8 or 9, and then we moved to Denver, Colorado in '99, and then I grew up there until end of high school, and then moved here in New York to New York for college, and I've just been here ever since. But yeah, it's then that's like a really crazy little Commonwealth pinball
Right.
thing that they've played. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And do your parents still live in Aurora or where do they live now?
They're in Aurora. My mom just retired a month ago, and it's looking good on her. And but now, so now she's in Atlanta with my sister, and she's raising 2 kids there. And so my mom's helping out. And so it all. She just seems. I I mean, she seems like genuinely happy and relaxed, and in a good state that I haven't really sort of been able to like see up close in a while because of work and because of the pandemic. And so yeah, I mean, like I took in a moment of gratitude last night when I went out with them for dinner, and I was just like, oh, okay, like I can just sort of soak this moment in too, where like I see my mom and dad being sort of happy, and it all sort of aligned correctly after like a whole my lifetime of just like hardship and sacrifice, and them letting me know that like, you wouldn't have been born. You're the second child. You wouldn't have been born if we had stayed in China. Like they sort of, they don't like very spitefully remind me of that, but every now and then my mom will be like, sometimes I think about what would have happened, what our lives would have been like if your dad and I had stayed in China, and then that would have meant that I wouldn't have been born with the one child only policy. And so every now and then that like kind of really messes with me on an existential level. But then I think, oh, but then that just means I should be even more grateful, or whatever. I should just experience this on a sensory level.
It's just fascinating to me to see where life takes you and how those decisions that your parents made. I mean, What a difference.
Oh,
And
yeah.
even going from Australia and then moving to the Denver area and or Canada and then the Denver area. And I don't know, it's just it reminds me of that movie Sliding Doors, when Gwyneth
Yeah.
Paltrow makes like a different decision and they show alternate endings to what anyway, it's just bizarre. But let's talk about growing up because were you always the funny kid? Bowen, were you the guy? Were you the class clown?
Well, it was something that was like assigned to me in a way, or it was just like mirrored. Like someone would tell me, "Oh, you're funny," or you're being a little like you're being the class clown in a way that was either pejorative or complimentary. And so because we would move around a lot, and even like in Canada, we switched. I mean, I switched schools once or twice. It was a thing where you had to adapt. And as a kid, that's very sort of tumultuous. But then the move from Canada, from Quebec, where I spoke French in school, and English was like the tertiary language, literally, because it was French in school, Mandarin at home, and then English every now and then when you would like run into like when a babysitter would come over or something. But then moving from Quebec to Denver was this really intense shock. I know it seems like Canada and the US are similar enough, but it was this thing where I was like, oh gosh, like this is a whole new culture, and I think I realized that even as a kid, because I was moving to Colorado right after Jean-Benet Ramsey, which happened in Boulder and Columbine. And I was like, Colorado is the place where the people get murdered. And I was just like so terrified as like, an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old that I was like, but I think I went to school. I remember the first day of school going into the fourth grade, just feeling anxious and just feeling like, just going into that kid logic of being like, well, my mom's going to drop me off and then she's going to get into a car accident and I'm going to, be an orphan.
But
It's
you were only in fourth grade, so you were very cognizant of Jean-Benet Ramsey and Columbine at what 8 or 9 years old?
yeah, because I mean, it was all over the news. I mean, back then it was like
Oh,
you would just,
believe me, because I covered all that
of
stuff, and
course,
yeah. But that's interesting that it kind of seeped into your mindset and made you anxious, understandably.
totally. And it was this thing that, teachers in Montreal would be like, well, Bowen's moving to Colorado to the US and we all know what happened there recently. It was kind of like that. I mean, very morbid, very, 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 very sad and scary.
Good luck, Bowen. Good luck. Go get them.
Go get him, go get him. And then so then I remember going to school, um, not knowing how to make friends, not really being able to speak the language. And then um by like the second week at recess, I had cheered up enough girls who were like crying because someone had said something mean to them or something that I'd like run over there and like just try to like get them to stop crying or something. And just because it made me upset to see them so upset. And that by like the third week of school, this girl Victoria Rosales, and I've run into her recently, and I've told her this story, but she was like, "Oh, and you're so funny," and that was like this like someone conferring upon me this identity that I was, funny, where I could like turn something on to make someone laugh or something, elicit that out of them. And then from there, it like I really kind of attached myself to that in a deep way. And it was like, well, this is my purpose in life is to like do this.
But it sounds like it was mixed with a lot of empathy, that you were very
Oh,
conscious of when people were suffering. Like a lot of kids probably wouldn't go over there and help someone who had been hurt. So that's kind of an unusual quality for a little boy, especially. I don't mean to gender
no,
cast or
no,
whatever,
no.
but I think it takes a certain emotional intelligence to kind of pick up on those things and to go to someone's rescue that way. So you did have empathy along with the ability to make people laugh, right?
Oh my gosh. I mean, the fact that you are observing this out of like immediately kind of picking up on this after after I sort of share that is why you're Katie Couric. But anyway, but yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you became sort of the funny guy, and you not only became the funny guy, but you also were obsessed with SNL. At what age did you start watching the show?
I mean, at probably a too young an age because it was right when I moved to the US, and I don't believe we got it in Canada back then in the late 90s because I didn't hear about it until I moved to the US, and then I forgot who was the host one day. Um, one week, but my sister had told me about I'm going over to my friend's house to watch this show called SNL. And I was like, I haven't heard of that. And she goes, oh, it's the show where it's, little comedy skits is how she described it. And there's a celebrity each week that comes in and is in all of them. I was like, that sounds so cool. And then a friend at school had also just been a fan of the show, and this was back in like the Sherry O'Terry, Will Ferrell, Chris Kattan era. And so it was all very broad and big and wacky. And
Don't do drugs. Woo!
yeah, oh my God. I mean, the Spartans, that was like my way in, and I was Charlize Theron. That was my first episode that I ever saw. Charlize Theron was the host. And I went over to my friend's house to watch it on a Saturday night. It was the neighbor's house, and so I think my parents it's my parents. It was just a dinner party situation, and then it was Saturday, and so we stayed up and watched it. And I thought, wow, this is so cool, and it's live. I mean, it was just so many. It was just such a way to like get me up to speed on what American pop culture was, because I wasn't super tapped into it growing up, even just in Canada before we moved. Wasn't super tapped into it because my parents, forbade cable. They were like, no cable, no TV, whatever, all that stuff. And then on Saturdays, I would get to watch. And that was sort of my way of like learning and getting the download on like what was happening in the world.
And when did you think, God, I want to be on that show? I would love to be in that ecosystem of SNL.
I mean, like pretty immediately, but I would never even
Allow
cons-
yourself.
well, I wouldn't even conceive of the idea of I would be that I would be on the show, and not for any like representation reason necessarily, but just because I was like, I don't know, like it's such a big chasm of knowing of having the idea of, oh, I want to be on SNL, to being on SNL. Like I did not know. I remember going on. I was curious about it enough to like go on to like online like message boards on like IMDb or something back when they had message boards.
Right?
And it was just looked into what the audition process was, or researched like what Will Ferrell's audition process was, and seeing that you had to sort of go through a program, some like developmental program at some comedy theater to get noticed by a scout. I was just like, that sounds so foreign to me, and I have no idea what the entry point is, and so I'm just gonna maybe resign myself to being like a fan from afar for the rest of my life. And I was completely okay with. I had like accepted that pretty quickly, I want to say.
And then before you go to NYU, you're in high school
Hmm.
and your mom and dad discovered that you're gay.
Yeah.
And tell me about what that was like. And I'm curious if it was, the if there was any kind of cultural aspect to them understanding, your sexual preference
Hmm.
because of being from China. And just I'm fascinated by that. Can you set the stage and how they
Yes.
discovered it and what happened?
Yeah, yeah. I might be bouncing back and forth between some things that come back to me, but I came home one day. It was senior year of high school, and I'd come out to friends sophomore year of high school at that point. And then especially after my sister left for college. My sister goes to NYU. So then at that point, she's not there to like be this, liaison between me and my parents. I mean, because she would sort of keep an eye on me at school and sort of keep me straight. I mean, figuratively speaking. But
Yeah.
so then by the time she left for college, I felt some like self-definition, self-awareness sort of kind of happening. And then was like, I'm gay. I can tell my friends. I'm going to keep it a secret from my parents, just because I knew that this was something that they would have a hard time understanding because of this cultural element of coming from China, where you'd watch a movie or something, there'd be a gay character or a gay kiss or something, and I'd hear my dad especially say, this is crazy. Like we never had people like this in China. Um, and he grew up in, you know, in a very rural area. Um, I mean, like this arid farm in the middle of the desert, in mainland China. And so, it's not that but to him, I mean, he sort of understood as fact that like there were no gay queer people at all where he grew up, but it's just it, he still has a hard I still have a hard time explaining to him, no, it's not that there weren't gay people where he grew up at, it's that you just didn't know about them, um or they kept it a secret or something. And I come home one day from class senior year. And meanwhile, I mean, the signs were there, the signals were there. I was big into theater. I you know, I most of my friends were um just like just had a certain sensibility about them. And so I came home one day to an open chat window that I had just like just it was a very salacious, not so clean chat window that I had open. And then my mother had printed out this exchange and sort of had me go through it and just be like, you have to explain this. And then pretty quickly, my dad comes home and it's just me. It's just the three of us at home. My sister's off in college, so it's the three of us just having these long, painful conversations where I just had to be like, yeah, this is it. This is who I am. And it wasn't me coming out on my own terms. But at that point, I just had to own up to it because there had been like suspicions before that my parents, like, there'd been things that my parents just kind of decided to look the other way on. But this was finally a time where I thought, you know, I'm about to go to college. I don't want to keep secrets from them. I've been found out, but I might as well own up to it. And then go ahead.
I was going to say, how how did they react? Do you remember? Um,
I had not seen my father cry since I'd only seen my father cry once, and that was when my grandfather passed away, when his father passed away. And then I was coming home to him and my mother crying every single day for like 2 weeks, and just being like, and just truly feeling that um viscerally I had done something wrong, that I had like caused them pain, and pain at a level that I had not seen from my dad. Um, and just like, you know, Asian soap opera heaving sobs from both of them.
which must have been really painful for you as a high school senior to witness that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And so I mean, with that sort of context, and with the context of them being these two scientifically minded people, and these immigrants who had like sacrificed so much. I mean, the idea of me moving to a country where I didn't speak the language and I would be like automatically in the minority, it just is wild to me, wild to me. And I didn't take that for granted back then. And then they also were solutions oriented people. And so to them, I mean, my dad didn't understand sort of the what the cultural forces behind what conversion therapy meant, but he was out here looking for solutions, and he came across a solution. One day I come home a couple weeks after you know, the chat window had been printed out. I came home to my dad presenting to me this sheet of paper, this website that he'd printed out of this, you know, therapist who was based out of Colorado Springs, um, who specialized in this conversion therapy. And he said, um, "We are going to go down there once a week, and it's a 2 hour drive each way, but we're gonna go there once a week. And you're going to talk to this man, and it'll be for 8 sessions. It'll be through the summer. And the ultimatum was, if you go to these sessions, then you can go to college out of state." And all I had wanted was to leave Colorado for school and be a New Yorker, I mean, my choices were between UCLA and NYU. Those were my final two choices. And then they had kind of given me this ultimatum to be like, you can go to those schools
If
if you go to this therapy. Um, and again, I mean, but I also want to just like put that in context. It was not like a threat. It was just like, please just do this for us. I mean, it was the dynamic of this was constantly shifting. It was either I was doing something wrong, or that they were in more pain than I was. I mean, it was very hard to gauge. And for me as a 17-year-old to be like, what is going on? Um, so I just went with it because I had never seen my parents this miserable. I was like, I have to do right by them in some way for them to stop feeling this pain. Um, so then, I mean, by then I had sort of decided to go to NYU because my sister was there, and that was also another element of it because my parents would feel better about me going to NYU, because my sister could be there as sort of this chaperone figure. But yeah, went to 8 sessions of this conversion therapy.
and what was that? What was conversion therapy like, Bowen?
It was actually pretty banal overall, which kind of surprises people. Like it wasn't like the melodramatic thing of like electrodes or whatever. It was me and the people who do experience that. Gosh, I mean, I'm very lucky that that's not what that was for me. But what it was for me was this easing into this like framework that same-sex attractions are like uncouth or should be undesirable or morally sort of wrong. And the first few sessions were pretty standard, just resembled talk therapy, resembled even the therapy that I have now. I'm like, oh, this is remarkably similar to my first experience with this, which was under these very wild pretenses. But then by the fourth or fifth session, he'd started to sort of work in this thing of like, okay, let's go through one by one, or as specifically as you can, like instances where you felt attracted to another man. And I was like, wait, I haven't cataloged all of them like individually, but okay, we'll start with this. And then he would just kind of try to link those moments to some physical sensation, like physical sense memory. And then it would be kind of leading questions to get me to say that I was attracted to another man because I was feeling bad about myself, or because I was in physical discomfort or pain or something. And it was just sort of this like very insidious way of like trying to tell me or internalize this idea that like being gay is that your sexual preference is a result of your external circumstances.
Hmm.
So
Sort of a
that's what it
strange
was.
association. And so you go through all these sessions for your parents because you
Hmm.
love them. And as you said, you'd never seen them so miserable. And did you come home and say, or did you kind of let sleeping dogs lie, head off to NYU and just hope that time would acclimate them and make them become more accepting?
It was the latter, but then even at the there was like a 1 inch tall person in my head that was like, maybe this works. Maybe this works. Maybe you go to NYU and everyone tries to reinvent themselves in some way when they go to college. I was like, maybe you try this on for size, being straight. And so went to NYU my freshman year. I move in with my sister. Did not do that, did not do the dorms, moved in with my sister and thought, wow, okay. I mean, she is the room next to mine. She knows everything that I am doing. And that's sort of an interesting experience for me to like go to college and like still and feel like I'm with family. And but it was a great time. I mean, like she and I still say like, I mean, we were great roommates. We were great roommates.
Was she accepting though of the fact that you were gay? Or I mean, where did she come down on this?
She was put in this very tough spot to like mediate both sides.
Hmm.
Just to truly be someone who had to like communicate between me and my parents, whether it was because of a language barrier or cultural barrier or whatever, like this is where this person's coming from. And I think both sides, both me and my parents, were upset at her for different reasons at various points. I mean, I remember one time she knocked on my door and sort of slipped, or she knocked on my door and she handed me this like book that was written by some like conversion therapy quack, and I was just like, I don't want to read that. And then she was like, well, it would mean a lot to mom and dad if you did. And I remember being very upset at her for a long time, for that specific incident. So she was kind of,
She was
she was
trying to keep the peace in the family.
totally, and like, that's its own sort of emotional labor that like I still haven't fully like, not appreciated, but like I haven't fully like thought about that in a way that like, oh God, like she was in her own tough spot. She was in her own personal hell with when that whole situation happened. It wasn't even like a this side versus that. It was like my parents sort of expressing some care and love for me because they had been socialized to think that being gay was going to set me back. It was going to put me in danger and all these different things. And they were being protective. And I think, and it's hard, it's still hard to parse out where that protective instinct starts and where the homophobia ends, or the other way around, you know?
Right.
So,
And how are they feeling? Was there a moment where you felt like your parents kind of adjusted or accepted and said, this is, because it's interesting. I've been writing a memoir and I was looking back at how we covered Matthew Shepard. And then I interviewed Jim Obergefell, who was the
mhm.
plaintiff in the Supreme Court case that legalized same sex marriage. And it's actually really unbelievable how far we have come. It's something that we don't really, it just in the last 25 years or
Mhm.
more when it comes to gay, accepting gay
Yeah.
relationships, et cetera, and really celebrating gay relationships. And how are they feeling today versus, you're 30. So we're talking about 12 years ago,
Yeah.
right? Or 12 or 13 years ago. Have they kind of reached at least maybe an uncomfortable
Yeah.
acceptance, or how are they feeling about it now?
I think they have reached it. I mean, yesterday, I mean, yeah, again, I'm 30. And so naturally they're thinking about grandkids for me. I mean, kids for me. And so they're like, how would you go about that? And I'd be like, well, if I wanted kids, then this is how maybe I would think about this or that. And they were like, okay, interesting. Oh, and then I brought up BD Wong, who I'm close with and who is who I've worked with very recently, and he and I have this very good sort of mentor mentee bond that I'm very grateful for. And I brought him up, and I was like, he's had this son, or he just naturally came up in conversation, and then slowly sort of revealed that he was gay because I don't think my parents really realized. And then I was like, and he has this kid who's in college now. And then my dad was like, he was married to a woman. I was like, no, he got a surrogate and all this stuff. And then he was like, interesting. So I mean, he's adjusting to it. It's not fully inconceivable to him that this kind of thing happens in the real world. But if there was a moment, this also involves my sister because I had done this interview with Maureen Dowd for the New York Times, my first season on the cast of SNL, and she had sort of, in her way, I mean, she just Maureen Dowd, she's great, but she teased out of me these details about the conversion therapy, and I hadn't ever shared that on that scale or in that public way before, and it was just like in the newspaper, it was in the Sunday Times, and it was just like, whoa, this is crazy. And my first thought was, my parents are going to be upset in some way that something this personal is being aired out, and that this is something they're going to have to go into work the next day, and their coworkers are going to know that this is something that they did, or or whatever. And then my sister called me the day after that piece came out, and she was like, that profile came out, and she was like, mom and dad read the profile, and actually I think they've come to some better understanding of like what that time was like for you. And that I think they're moving closer and closer to this like full on acceptance. And I was like, wow, interesting. I mean, that really surprised me that was their takeaway, rather than thinking, what does this mean for me? They were thinking
Or
the
we're
whole time.
so embarrassed, or, or
Yeah,
we're ashamed that we put our son through that, right?
right.
On so many different levels, they could have had reactions.
Absolutely. But instead their parental thought was, oh, what did this mean for our son? And I mean, I just that kind of surprised me in a very sort of meaningful way. So I think it's been very incremental um, over the past 12 years, and probably like the way that it's been sort of collectively incremental for everybody.
But I think maybe exacerbated by the cultural norms, and in China,
Hmm.
uh, where they were raised, how is homosexuality viewed?
I don't quite know exactly. It's probably more nuanced than I could ever like, reduce down to like a thought or two. But I think for them it was something that they just didn't encounter. They just didn't encounter, and so for them it was not understood because they did not ever find themselves interacting with it, or driven to form an opinion about it because they just didn't see it. And so of course it just became this thing that over time was something that they were afraid of, I want to say. Um, but that's just them. I mean, I don't know. There is this like beautiful queer history in a lot of East Asia, but I think for them, growing up in the time period that they did, I mean, they were both in the first class after the Cultural Revolution that was allowed to apply to college. And so there was a long period of time when a lot of the youth and a lot of students in China weren't allowed to matriculate to like higher education. You'd have to go work a couple of years on a commune or something and go to the countryside and just like really kind of have your hands turned to calluses from like all the manual labor you were doing. And finally, they were in this very competitive year of college applications where students from like the years before who weren't allowed to go to college were also applying. And so they had just always had to operate on this level of like being exceptional, being the best. And for them, being gay seemed to be this like handicap in every single way, that it meant you weren't ascribing to some like traditional family value system, or that it meant you were sort of rejecting every single part of what being in society meant. I mean, to them, it just meant it was like the one thing that could sort of topple all of that. Um, and I think it's taken a lot of really thoughtful unlearning for them to like come to where they are now. And yeah, and then like, and the thing is that I've talked about how I've like forgiven them out of that, but also in some irrational way I've forgiven them because I hate to say this about my parents, but I don't think they could have known any better at the time than to like put me through all of that.
Yeah, I think sometimes people don't appreciate that you know, that everyone, given their circumstances and upbringing, their limitations, right? Or people do the best they can with the experiences and information that they may have.
Hmm.
I think in this culture, in this day and age, sort of overall, we're so judgmental and unforgiving of people, not sort of appreciating where they're coming from
Yeah.
and the forces that shape them. But meanwhile, you go on to NYU, you do stand up, you then do a podcast. What did you major in at NYU?
I was a chemistry
Oh
major.
my
I
God.
was
What?
I was a BA in chemistry and not a BS. I was a bachelor in arts in chemistry. I mean, that just
Wait, how is that?
so I was on the pre-med track. I was thinking, I gotta hang up the comedy dream because I was doing like short form improv in high school and going downtown and like, this one of my favorite teachers who I still keep in touch with, sort of was the sponsor of the improv group in high school, was the assistant director at this theater downtown. And so like he was my gateway in, and just was that kid. And like on college tours, I'd be like, yeah, cool. So do you guys have an improv group here? Like I was that guy, for better or worse. But then I go to NYU and I kind of put all my social eggs in one basket, which was to get on the improv group there because, it was it seemed very seamlessly integrated into the comedy theaters that are here in New York at the time, that were here in New York at the time. And I thought NYU is going to be great because I'm gonna have all these friends who like comedy as much as I do, who have like, watched this many episodes of The Simpsons or Seinfeld or, like just like Mad TV, SNL, all of that. And then I did find those people. And then throughout college, I was on this improv group with all of these Tisch kids, these arts kids who were
Right.
in, studying film
At
and
the Tisch
TV.
school at
Yes,
NYU. Yeah.
yes. And I was sort of the odd person for not being, a Tisch kid. And I was like, oh, I'm a chemistry major, but all of them were talking about going on to, you know, do these things in the industry. And I was like, I guess I'll go to med school. And like by senior year, I was like, is this right? And then commencement at NYU was at Yankee Stadium. And then I look around and all of my friends are like so excited for the next thing. And not that this is uncommon, but I wasn't. I was just like, no, what is my life going to be? Like, I don't think I'm doing the right thing. And then I went in for my MCAT the second time at One Penn Plaza, right next to Penn Station here in New York City, and that was where the testing center was. And I got to the short answer section, and then as soon as the cursor blinked, I thought back on this interview that I read Steve Carell do, where he talked about applying to law school when he was struggling, and he got to the personal essay section of the law school application, and he thought, I can't do this, and that interview just like flashed in my head when I was taking the MCAT, and I was like, I can't do this, I cannot do this, and so I voided my test, left the testing center, went downstairs, and just like I think I cried. I think I really did cry because I was like, this is something that I can't follow through on this because I don't think I'll be happy. And so then spent like the next like 7 years pounding the pavement. And so yeah, I mean,
Have you
it's been
ever
it's been a
met
long
Steve
one.
Carell and told him that story?
I've not told him that story, but I met him when I was still a writer at SNL, and he hosted, I think, my
Oh,
fourth
you should have
show.
told him.
I know, but I mean, I kept like my professional distance at the time. I mean, if I were to meet him again, and if it felt right, I absolutely would tell him that story and say that it really did kind of give me this model for like, okay, someone else has done this. Like I'm not alone in this experience of doubting what I should be doing next. Um, and sort of and going for this more secure path or something. Like this is someone who I admire, who I love, who did this. But yeah, next time I see him, I'll tell him.
You should. You should. Tell me about the podcast you did and kind of how that honed your skills for comedy.
Yeah, I mean, I should say that I was doing mostly improv in college, and after college it was sketch comedy. I dabbled in stand up a little bit. I'm not I consider myself a dilettante only when it comes to stand up. But the podcast that we started with Matt was just this very like one. It just seemed like this very low stakes thing where we would meet once a week, and it was just an excuse for us to hang out and just sort of chop it up and talk about what was happening in pop culture. And then it sort of turned into this thing where like it had its own sort of vocabulary and vernacular, and you know slowly our listenership started to build, and now it's this really I think healthy um outlet for me to just be myself, because I think I mean, so often everyone in the industry sort of spins out about where they're positioned, what they're doing, if they're doing enough. And I mean, for me to sort of just share this like one moment a week with Matt, who is on his own, just like kind of doing his own amazing things. And he's just such a brilliant writer and such a talented actor that I think, oh gosh, I'm so lucky that I have this this other sort of way to sort of like develop a sensibility and a voice and just know like what I am like about, just in terms of like how I express myself, because he's someone who has like puppy dog energy and I'm someone who is like who's a little bit more coolly reserved and cat-like, and I never would have like known that about myself had I not had this like relational gauge um to just sort of discover that. Yeah.
And meanwhile, you become a writer on SNL in what,
Hmm.
2018,
Yes.
2017, 2018. And
2018.
um, so what was that experience? Tell me about getting the call and you're hired. I mean, how did you get that job, I guess?
SNL does this sometimes where they'll hire writers out of the screen tests, and I had submitted a tape in 2017 and thought they're never going to hire me. They're never going to hire this effeminate Asian guy. Like I was like, there's no lane for that there, and it's not like a role that they need to fill at all. So I was like, I'm just gonna have fun with this. So I did like I threw a bunch of things at the wall, and I was just like, as long as I think it's funny, I did like my impressions were, Michiko Kakutani and like just the book reviewer at the New York Times and like who's never been photographed and never
Yeah.
been like, I was just like, I don't, and it was just her like reviewing books and threatening that she was going to punch Juno Diaz in the face or something, like just crazy stuff. I was like, this is never going to get me in. And then somehow I cleared the hurdles to do the showcase live in front of an audience at UCB, and then did the screen test in front of Lorne, and then got to this final meeting with Lorne. And then I remember it being so late, and I was the last person he saw, I think. And he was just like, "Where are you from?" And I was like, "I'm actually, I grew up in Canada. I speak a little French." And then I remember he turned to the producer that was in the room and was just like, fully just kind of sidelined me and was just like, the French have great books, don't they? And I was just like, okay, I did not get this job. So I left thinking I didn't get it. But then they called me back into audition again that March of 2018. And I was like, okay, I have another shot at this. Let's go. Did that. They said, we're not doing a mid-season hire. Come back in August. I came back in August, auditioned another time with a new set. And then I was like, either they take me or they don't. And then at that time, they were like, we're not sure what to do with Bowen, but here's this offer to hire him as a writer. So I wrote for one season, and I think had I not had that season to write, I would have. I mean, Lauren even said this to me on the call when he called me a year later, 2019 in September, to tell me that he was moving me to the cast. He was like, said that it was his plan because if he was like, he was like, I knew you were going to be. He was like, I know you're going to be scrutinized and people are going to keep an eye on you in a way they're going to evaluate you differently because of who you are. And so I would have done you a disservice if I had thrown you out there like without a paddle. Like if you didn't know how this place worked on a creative level as a writer, then you would have had a harder time. And I think he's right. Like I
Wow, that was really nice of him, Bowen. I mean, like he was
yeah,
he had your back.
he did. I think he did. I really think he did. And I think he was right because by my second week on the show as a cast member, I got something on that I'd written with some other writers, but I knew as soon as as soon as the piece got picked to go to the show, I knew who to talk to for the costume. I knew who to talk to for the props. I mean, I just knew on a production level what to do, what my resources were, and I would have had no idea if I had just been plucked out of the morass and thrown in and been like,
Seems like
figure it out.
every person, every cast member would benefit from writing
I
on
think
that show for
so.
a year, right?
I think so. I think so. And yeah, and there are plenty of examples of people who did that. Sudeikis, Leslie Jones, you know,
Tina, right? Wasn't
Tina. Yeah, just a lot of people who have successfully modeled, a tenure there have gone have done that thing. So I'm
was
yeah.
was there a lot of pressure for you? This is such a predictable question, but you're the first Chinese American cast member. You're the first openly gay when you became a cast member. Uh, um, and do you feel have you felt much pressure? I mean, this has been such an interesting time, and I think you even actually made a joke about this when you were on the Aquafina's special. wait, I'm trying to think of where you did make the joke about this. I read it. Oh, 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 oh. Um, you were on the Two Dope Queens HBO
Uh-huh,
show,
uh-huh, uh-huh.
and you made a joke about it being a good time for Asian representation. And I wanted I would be remiss not to talk to you about what's going on with so many Asian Americans and hate crimes and how horrifying this has been and how late as a culture we were to recognize this, I think, in many, many ways, Asian hate and these antiquated attitudes towards Asian Americans. It's been a revelation and it shouldn't have been. But before I get to sort of the larger issue, as someone who was, as I said, as someone who was the first Chinese American cast member, as someone who was openly gay on the cast, how did that inform the your humor or your feelings about being a part of the show?
Yeah. Um, I feel like, I mean, I tell people that I came in at the right place at the right time. And I believe that Terry Sweeney in the 80s was the first, I think he was the first gay cast member on SNL for a season. And he, I think was like one of the first gay people on primetime television, or not primetime, it's SNL. It's SNL, so it's technically not, I
Right,
guess.
right, right.
But he was one of the like the few, if not only gay people on TV. And then there was John Milheiser in 2014, I want to say, who was on the show as well. But in my case, I came in, and at that point, there had been this legacy of queer writers and performers too, with Terry and with John and with uh, Denitra Vance and with Kate already being so established there. I mean, I came in at a time when it was not an uphill battle for me to be like, I need to prove something about what you can do at the show as a queer person. And so I came in already having a relationship with some of the gay writers at the show, like James Anderson and Julio Torres. Um, and I just thought, wow, I mean, I feel some pressure, obviously. I would be sort of dishonest if I was saying that I didn't, but I thought I have things, I've sort of the wind at my back in terms of like doing this in a way that I think will satisfy me creatively and hopefully make other people understand where I'm coming from. With the whole thing of writing their first season, I thought, at least, it goes back to what Lauren was saying. Like he would have done me a disservice by like throwing me out there, just with me not knowing how anything worked. Um, and so, I still am going through some weekly things where I think about how I should present myself as an Asian person on this TV show. But in terms of being put out there as an Asian person on the show and having the Asian person's viewpoint, I struggled with that a lot when we, uh, about a month ago, after the Atlanta shootings. Um, we would come back from a hiatus, and it was on people's minds, both outside of the show and at the show internally, where people were like, I mean, it has to be addressed in some way, right? So what do we do? And then I just heard through different people at the show that like the hope was that I would write something for Weekend Update as myself to talk about what was happening. And I was just for a little bit just thinking, I don't think I want to do that. And it feels like something I'm sort of being saddled with, and I don't know if I'm in the place creatively to like make light of it, and struggled with all these things. But then there's another writer at the show we just hired this season, Celestium, and they said to me, if it's not going to be us, then who? Like, if we don't, if it's not you and me writing this together, then like who's going to talk about this on the show? And don't we feel like, wouldn't it be even weirder if the show didn't bring it up at all? And I said, yeah, I guess you're right. And so um, we wrote this piece that was, that led with some jokes at the top, but then kind of takes this left turn into this place of kind of despair and hopelessness that I think is honest, is authentically like what a lot of Asian people are feeling in this country, where they're like, I mean, it's just like there's no dialogue to have with someone if their instinct is to like punch a grandmother on the street, you know? So it takes a turn into there, and then we sprinkle in some jokes, but then at the end, it gets strident, and that's sort of like a nice structure that Lauren I think likes, and that's been on the show in the past when it comes to like, a grim story like this. But then afterwards, I did feel like there was this like vulnerability hangover. I was like, wow, I really like. It was the first time I was on the show with like as myself, like talking, and I felt very vulnerable. But I felt like it was something that I was imperfect, but like it was something that I think uh, 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 I'm proud of just having it be realized from like the beginning of the week when I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna do this. I don't know how to address this in a way that feels like it fits into the show. And then by the end of it, feeling like, okay, you know what? Like we did something, and we did something that hopefully resonates or activates or motivates people in some way. Because the whole piece was about how we sort of have to, as a culture, move past like the cursory acknowledgement of the problem and actually activate and do something about it, in whatever way we can. And I think people understood that.
As an Asian American man, I'm curious as you saw this unfold, and I had suspicions that this was going to happen when some of my friends who are in the medical community said that, there were slurs hurled at them at the beginning of the pandemic. I
Hmm.
remember interviewing an Asian American doctor, and it obviously just got worse and worse and worse.
Hmm.
And witnessing this, were you at all surprised? Were you appalled? How would you describe your reaction to the kinds of incidents that we were seeing happen with greater frequency, or at least getting more and more attention?
Hmm. I feel like I was sort of awakened in a way that a lot of not just Asian people were. And I don't even, yeah, I mean, I don't even know that we're all late to this realization. I mean, I think it's coming in on time, because I mean, all of us have been socialized under this idea that like, I mean, gosh, I mean, my friend Joel Kim Booster, who's another Asian comedian, said, you know, I get mixed up with another Asian person once a month. Pre-COVID would be like even more, but like just the way that Asian people are sort of like faceless in Western culture is like it just kind of it's a symptom of the same disease, where it's like we're all sort of dehumanized in a very quick, immediate way. And so like all my life I've grown up like having slurs sort of casually tossed off at me about someone else, when I was within earshot, like all of these crazy things. And what's kind of terrible is that I was used to it, and that none of this was surprising to me, uh, until very recently, when it felt like there was a collective rejection of that from a lot of people, in the Asian American community, where we all thought,
Wait a second here,
but isn't
because
that,
it's something you
yeah,
would become inured to in a way.
yes, absolutely. And isn't that like, and like it kind of fills me with a little bit of shame to admit that, but I think that's true of a lot of Asians in this country. And for the people who like had that, who have realized this early on, who were ahead of the curve, I think, wow. I mean, like truly, like good for you. And I don't mean that sarcastically. I mean like I wish I had like been as developed as that earlier on, because now I'm finally at a place where I'm like, I can say no to this joke that's being written for me. I can say no to a joke that's written for someone else, but that still sort of takes a swipe. I mean, I've had to do that in multiple environments, just with among friends, professionally, whatever. Like now it just feels like if I put a foot down when it comes to that kind of thing, then that it's more easily understood. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been very moved by the whole, it's not a monolithic community, but so many Asian Americans I know, just really sadly, because they should have been educated before, but really kind of standing up and, whether
Mhm.
it's Olivia Munn and, so many different people in the entertainment industry, um, but it is still so, um, kind of unsettling that we're just recognizing it in
Yeah.
2020, 2021, right?
Yeah. Right, right, right.
But do you think it'll change? Are you feeling that this heightened sensitivity and understanding and awareness of this kind of prejudice and discrimination will will help alleviate it?
I hope so, and I mostly just hope that, the discourse sort of turns away from, like, the actual hate incidents, um, and I think there's some collective shift right now, at least, like, among people I talk to, where we're like, "Okay, so we understand where the hashtag comes from of Stop Asian Hate, but it should be more about protecting the well-being of Asian people in the country. Because if we're centering the aggression that's being directed towards us, then I don't know if there's ever going to be a counter gesture that's going to be strong enough to like push back against that in a way that eliminates it. It shouldn't be about eliminating. I mean, ideally, it should be about eliminating that kind of uh, volatility towards the Asian community, but I think the way to actively prioritize everyone's well-being and for everyone to be in a better position is just to make sure that we're all taken care of, just on like on a material level, emotional level, all of that. So that's like the thing that I hope for and that I foresee maybe happening is that we all kind of we take it out of the terms of like a hate crime. It's more about it's not about like the prosecutorial way of like making sure people are brought to justice for whatever they do, but it's just about making sure that like people down up and down every class in the Asian community are just sort of solid,
And
right?
also just educating people, people
Yeah,
are
yeah.
just not well educated. And as I read, like to say to an Asian American person, where are you from? You
Mhm.
know, um, I think that we have to understand sort of the vocabulary of of appreciating, recognizing, accepting people who are different without kind of otherizing them. And,
Sure.
I think sometimes it's not, well-meaning people are just don't have the vocabulary or the understanding to appreciate things that are offensive to other people, you know?
Sure, sure, and then I think I mean, I'm not demanding anything of anybody, just with especially among Asian people, but I think people are also realizing on all sides that there are ways to have conversations that I mean, the goal should never be to alienate someone and sort of slap them on the wrist and say, "Don't do that." It's more about just knowing intention, and intention doesn't equal impact all the time, of course, but there are ways to like start there and just be like, oh well, I understand what you're asking me, but maybe instead of where are you
Right.
from, there's you can ask this way, and just as a way of not shutting down the conversation um by sort of placing these sort of limits on it in terms of like it being this mm, like I just never I personally am trying to figure out a way to not be a school marm about it because I constantly find myself being like, oh wait, I'm being a little I'm wagging my finger a little too much and I should figure out a way not to.
I know we have to wrap it up. I could talk to you all day, but just a couple of things I wanted to ask you about. One is you got off Twitter, Bowen, for
Hmm.
sort of your self-preservation. And I know you read Jenny Odell's book, How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy.
Yeah.
Has that helped you? And I feel like I'm addicted to social media. My drug of choice is Instagram, and I'm just curious how that has helped you become more centered and just helped you in general with your kind of your state of mind.
I I feel like, I mean, so I've gotten off Twitter and then I've gone back on, I've gotten off, and I would sort of really kind of mess with like my cadence of how often I would be off and how often I would be back on. But I finally pulled. I mean, you can do this thing where you either are you can deactivate for 30 days or 12 months. I don't know if people know this, but you can deactivate, and then after those periods, then your handle goes away, your account gets shut, you lose all your tweets forever. And I would only ever do the 12-month option because I wanted to maybe within a year go back.
Yeah.
But then a little over a month ago, I finally was like, I think I have weaned off of this long enough and I should just do the 30-day option. And I think it's been a full month. And I think like as of last week, and like it's fully like I've let go of that completely in a way that like I can never get back. And that actually is really, really beautiful for me.
Why? How's it changed, sort of
I think,
changed things for you?
yeah, I mean, I think I made it the only source of my self-worth for a long time. And I mean, this isn't anything new, but like it would be this compulsory thing that I would check in the like at all points of the day as I was idling. It's just like as I'm sitting down, like I could be reading a book, I could be doing the crossword puzzle, I could be doing all these things, and yet I was kind of having the tone of my day set by whatever was being said generally on Twitter or about me on Twitter. And it just felt like such a it felt like I was on such a bad receiving end of this crazy power dynamic where I was like, I am handing over the keys to my life to like this gallery of people. And like, I'm still on Instagram, but I'm starting to sort of feel that sort of idea creep into Instagram too, where I'm like, oh, what am I going for? Am I going to ever be happy with what I am doing, how I'm behaving on social media, how I am being seen? Because what Jenny Odell talks about in the book is that social media is this weird thing where, you know, you people exist out on the street where you can go outside, and if someone sees you, then you exist to them, or you just exist by existing. But on social media, you can only exist by putting some input into the system and like posting something.
It's a lot
Or
of pressure, isn't it?
it's a lot of pressure, but it incentivizes like a way of putting yourself out there that is not that like requires you to like do something. Does that make sense? Like you can't just sort of sit there and just be. You have
Because
to.
it's so carefully curated.
Yes, it's so carefully curated, but like no one knows if you exist. No one knows whether or not you exist on social media unless you post, unless you like throw something into this giant fountain of something. Does that make sense? Like
Yeah.
you have to form an opinion, or you have to like put an image of yourself out there, or of what you're looking at, or of what it just felt like sometimes it just feels like more and more that I don't really have anything to say, and that's okay, you know?
You did have something to say when Elon Musk was named as the host, and of course,
Yes.
I watched on Sunday because 'cause I'm a loser and go to bed early.
No, no.
But, what it what was your primary objection? And now that he's done it, how did you feel about the whole thing?
You know, my it wasn't even an objection, but I think the media narrative got sort of blown out because when it comes to Elon, it's like any inch turns into a mile or whatever, and that's just like who he is as this figure, um, who's of course larger than life, larger than the planet, and I was just like, honestly, I had taken a Xanax and I was on a plane to LA, and I just saw this tweet and I was just in my stupor. I thought, what does he mean? I truly was just confounded in a way that a lot of people were. And that's all. And so I posted, what does this mean? This tweet where he says, let's see how live SNL really is. And I thought, what does this mean? Is this like, is this a threat? Like, what's going on? It was truly out of confusion. It wasn't even objection. It was just like, wait, what? But of course, like,
Yeah,
that gets compounded with like the overall controversy around him being selected to host.
right.
That was just sort of folded into that. And so, look, I get it. Like, I did something that was not necessarily couth, or whatever, and
But you weren't
so
the only one. I mean, there were a lot of people who thought this was a real head scratcher, right?
sure,
Not
because
just, on the show.
on the show, I think we just all had to sort of like hold on to ourselves all week, and it turned into a fine show. He came in and was very clearly like maybe out of his element. This is not something that he does regularly, right? And so I think we all just had to adjust to that, to him being there. And I think
And what
I
was it like? I mean, and what was he like? And
he was
what did you
perfectly
think?
he was perfectly pleasant and great, and he came in and did the job and showed up, and just like he was present for it, and I think he also came in with this um understanding maybe that like he was going to be able to sort of bring whatever ideas he had to the front. But I think any host who comes through that system has someone like Lauren Michaels telling them this is how the show works and this is how it's going to work. And I think I think Elon himself probably adjusted to that in a way that I think um, was serviceable.
That's damning with faint praise, Bowen.
No,
If
it's
I'm ever
not.
called serviceable, I'll be like,
It's I would never. I mean, a server. If someone were to say that I did a serviceable job at something, I'd be like, great, I did it.
really?
I think so. Oh, that's not damning at all.
Oh, okay, okay. Okay. I thought it was
Uh,
really fascinating to watch him.
I mean,
You know,
there's some.
it's it showed you how hard that is to do. He
Mhm.
was sort of charming in his attempt to, right? I mean, it's just hard. It's hard to put somebody, and for him to say I have Asperger's, and
Sure, sure.
it was pretty interesting to watch.
He was adapting to something that was completely foreign to him, right? And like that, there's something to be said about that.
Right.
It is not something that everybody does. I mean, yeah. I mean, like I'm probably still. You're talking to me like 2 days after the show happened, and I think I'm probably going to be in process with this for a while. Like it was just it was a very interesting week, very interesting week.
You have done so many things. I mean, is there something that are you just going to continue to enjoy growing as a performer on SNL? I know you do stand up still, even though I know you consider yourself a dilettante, but you still kind of play in that space a little bit. You did the Aquafina stuff.
Mhm.
If you sort of had to chart out the next 5 or 10 years, are there things you want to do? Are there kind of moments that you want to seize or opportunities that you see yourself doing? Would you like to do more films, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I
I
mean,
feel very entertainment tonight right now, but I'm
I
just
love
curious.
it. I feel like to get this side of Katie Couric is actually, I can't believe I'm on the receiving end of this. But I don't know. I would love to. I mean, there's this phrase that I repeat all the time from Tony Hale, from Veep and Arrested
Love
Development.
Tony Hale.
It's fantastic. But I think someone asked him, I forget where, but someone asked him what his best sort of career advice was, and he said, especially when it came to comedians or comedic actors, he said, instead of investing in a career, instead of thinking about in terms of investing in a career, think in terms of investing in a community, because it's the people you come up with that sort of make it such a good experience. And I think I'm very lucky to feel like I'm a part of a community among people who I would do like Brooklyn bar basement shows with 5 years ago, and now they're in movies and they're writing for shows and they're doing all these incredible things. And so I just want I mean, I honestly want to think of some way to like build out this like way of developing some community around comedians, and especially queer ones, especially Asian ones, whether together or separately, that just like is able to come up together. Because I was talking to BD Wong about this, and he was telling me like, he's talking to me. He was like, you are probably the subject of a lot of these discussions where it's like, why did it take so long for an Asian person to be on SNL, or a fully East Asian person to be on SNL? And his theory is that like there is just no inevitable process for developing people who come out of certain programs, or there's no educational process, there's no process that like takes you from one end to the other that is as obvious as it is for certain other people. And so I'm like, oh yeah, like maybe there's a way to like build that. And so, I mean, I obviously want to do the fun stuff, like be in things, but I think that's like the sort of community investment that I think I want to like try and help with, is just to make sure it happens more often.
And what did you tell those college graduates when you had to write your I Heart graduation speech? What was the main takeaway?
I think the little catchphrase that I tried to work in was like triumph, like just triumph quietly to yourself, like because the theme was like it's weird, like we might not, you might not be doing an in-person ceremony this year, but I mean for myself it's been like the thing that I've tried to hold on to is just take moments to like just really like triumph quietly to yourself when things, when you've accomplished something, or even if you've like had a bad day, um just like give yourself the time to just appreciate what you've done, because it's like I said, I was like, life is not going to give you ceremonies all the time, and so you kind of have to throw one in your head every now and then, not to the point of like full delusion, but to the point of like thinking, wow, I did that. And that's been the thing that I've like held on to, that's grounded me even in this whole move and this stressful time that you're catching me in. Like the thing that's been grounding again has been thinking, wow, I was able to like do this move while wrapping on the second season of Nora from Queens, while trying to come up with stuff for SNL, while planning out my summer, and like to just like I thought to
While
myself,
hosting
wow,
your parents?
while hosting my parents. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm on the other side of that. It's crazy. But yeah, just like the message was just
Celebrate yourself.
celebrate yourself in a way that is not like hackneyed,
No,
like
I know
go
what you
you.
mean.
Yeah.
No, but just kind of acknowledge,
Yeah.
self-acknowledgement and
Yes.
appreciation.
Yeah.
Um, it's so fun to talk to you, Bowen. You're so intelligent and thoughtful.
Thank you,
It's
Katie.
really fun to have a conversation with you.
Me as
Before we
well.
go, tell me real quickly, because we feature these things in our newsletter. What are you watching right now? Are you enjoying anything that you're watching?
I just finished Girls Five Eva on Peacock, created by Meredith Scardino, executive produced by Tina Fey and Jeff Richmond and Robert Carlock. I was in one episode, so I'm biased, but I didn't have any visibility on the rest of the season, so it just came out on Peacock. I watched the whole thing in 2 days. I was like, this is delightful. It just went down so easy, but it still had so much heart and so many good jokes. Renee Elise Goldsberry, Sarah Bareilles.
I love
Uh,
Renee. I mean, she's so awesome. What a talent.
what a talent.
All of
Yeah.
those women, right?
Yeah.
So I'll have to check that out. So you
Please
like
do.
that. Anything else that you're not in, Bowen, that you've enjoyed?
That I haven't been in, um, I've enjoyed Michael Che's new show on HBO Max, and I just finished watching The Circle season 2 on Netflix. I really got a kick out of that. Just perfect ambient reality TV that was still very entertaining, very strategic, and there were a lot of things to follow that it didn't feel like pure. It didn't feel like pure candy. It felt like there was some like nutritional value to it. So that was good too.
Are you listening to anything, any podcasts that you're enjoying
Oh, I am
or
listening to,
music? It doesn't have to be a podcast, it could be
sure,
anything.
sure. I'm listening to this Norwegian artist named Girl in Red, and she's very fun indie pop. Um, Gosh, that's it. I can't believe you're asking me about my media diet. I have no. I'm a little paralyzed with
Oh,
how to
don't be,
answer.
don't be, don't be. Are you cooking anything? Are you,
Oh no, I just did my first grocery run of this apartment like minutes before we went on. I just came back from the grocery store and I familiarized myself with the shelves. And so I haven't cooked anything. But I've just been like recouping from the move, which was
have you
2
been
weeks ago.
getting like, ordering out or sort of,
Yeah, yeah. I've been, and I was doing too much of it to begin with, but I think now,
what's your go-to sort of that you've been eating?
like, ooh, it's bad. It's like a bacon, egg, and cheese on a roll on like a brioche bun. Just really douse it in hot sauce, and that's just like that'll get me through the whole day if I order it like within 2 hours of waking up. That'll just be like all that sustains me
And do you
for.
are you starting to go out in New York and going to restaurants at all?
Yeah, I'm going to a few restaurants. I went to one last night with my parents. Went to this cool hip Chinese restaurant that my dad particularly enjoyed, which was a big deal because he has very high standards for that kind of
What's
thing.
it called?
It's called Kings County Imperial here in
Uh-huh.
Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and they have great mapo tofu. They have great soup dumplings. It's wonderful,
I love soup dumplings. And
delicious.
anything I asked Bowen what he was anything else. Oh, what are you reading? Bowen, are you reading anything?
Yes, I just finished this memoir called "Crying in H Mart" by this musician. Her name is Michelle Zauner, but it's a memoir about her feeling connected to her mother before and after she passes away from a GI cancer. It's this beautiful book about, grief and cooking and all these things.
Where did you come up with the crazy iceberg skit? Is that your favorite that you've done so far?
It was probably the most fun on a performance level, just being in the room and just having it play. But it was Anna Dressen's idea. She's one of the head writers at SNL now. And she texted me back in February. She said, for the April 10th show, maybe you play the iceberg that sank the Titanic. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? And she was like, oh, I don't know, never mind. We'll get to it in April. Like she had this idea months in advance because she was like, it should be somewhat timely because of the anniversary of the sinking, which is in the middle of April. And I go, okay, maybe. And so we let it rest for a couple months. And then the week of that show, I texted her on Monday. I was like, what do you think of that iceberg idea again? And she was like, I completely forgot about it. But then we started riffing on it. We're like, okay, he's there to promote his album. He's there. He doesn't want to talk about it. He's really grown since then. Um, all these things. And I mean, the entire time, you have to understand, Katie, the entire week, both of us looked at each other multiple times and we're just like, this is never going to be on TV. Like, how will we ever make this work? And we would just cackle, like laugh hysterically to each other, like, what are we doing? This is nuts. Down to like Saturday at like 6:30 p.m., us just looking at each other, being like, what are we doing? This is gonna get cut immediately. Like, it's just such a big swing. And like, why would Lauren ever think that this would make any sense? Then we did it at dress rehearsal, and it did better than we thought. We were like, oh, okay. And then Anna comes to me afterwards and she's like, Lauren liked it. And I was like, all right, I guess maybe we do it. And then finally the picks come out for the air show. It's in. I go, wow, I guess we're doing this. And then somehow the air audience was even more on board than the dress audience was. And I was like, this was just, I mean, every star aligned for this. And I just can't, I still can't believe it happened.
And you also had that Harry Styles
Oh,
skit that was never going to see the light of day until Harry Styles, like, I don't know,
he
you
kind of
completed him or something,
he
Bowen.
he exhumed it from the grave. And I mean, that was another moment where I turned to him and Cecily Strong, who was with me in that sketch. I co-wrote it with Julio Torres, this wonderful comedian friend of mine who was a writer there for several years. But I turned to both Cecily and Harry, and I was just like, "This can't be on TV." I mean, but that's when it's the most fun, is that like things that you never think could come to pass on the show end up happening, and then they have this weird life of their own afterwards. That's the most delightful part of the whole job.
It must make you question your judgment though. Like if you think, oh, this is going to kill and it bombs, and this is the strangest thing ever, and
Yeah.
it becomes a viral sensation.
I mean, yes, the inverse happens all the time. Things that you're like so sure about that just no one else is on board. No one else is even remotely into it. And then it's the other way around so many other times too. And that's sort of the best part of the job, is just not ever getting it down to an actual science. Because even writers at SNL don't know what they're doing, obviously, all the time.
And that's the beauty of it. And that's when it really works, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Well, Bowen, thank you again. And again, I'm congratulations for all your success. I'm super happy for you, and not only enjoy watching you, but really, really enjoyed talking to you. So
Thank you
thank
so
you for
much,
all your
Katie.
time.